14 black stars with horrible tragic deaths. Death is the inescapable shadow that strikes without warning. A mechanical failure on a midnight drive, a split-second medical collapse, or sudden street violence is all it takes for the fragile thread of life to snap in an instant. Inside the platinum-plated kingdom of black entertainment, projecting invincibility is part of the job. Yet while these celebrated icons commanded stadium stages, they secretly walked a tightrope over disaster. Behind closed doors, fatal health battles and dangerous environments were kept guarded until tragedy shattered the illusion. Today on Black Hollywood Uncut, we expose the unvarnished truth behind 14 legendary black stars whose lives ended in horrific tragedies. Subscribe and hit that notification bell. Watch until the very end, because the shocking final moments on our countdown will leave you speechless. Michael Jackson died age 50 in 2009. Michael Jackson was not simply a singer. He was the biggest entertainer the world had ever seen. From the Jackson 5 to Thriller, from the moonwalk to sold-out stadiums, he became a symbol of music, dance, fashion, and global fame. His voice crossed borders. His videos changed television. His performances made people scream, cry, and collapse before he even reached the microphone. To millions, Michael Jackson looked almost untouchable. But behind the glitter, the glove, the cameras, and the screaming crowds was a life filled with pressure few human beings could survive. Michael had been famous since childhood. He grew up in front of the world, praised like a miracle and judged like a machine. Every change in his appearance, every rumor, every accusation, every medical issue, and every private struggle became public property. The same fame that made him immortal also trapped him inside a spotlight that never turned off. By 2009, Michael was preparing for his massive comeback concert series, This Is It. Fans believed they were about to witness the return of the King of Pop. Rehearsals were underway, expectations were enormous, and the world was watching closely. But behind that comeback dream, Michael was reportedly dealing with intense physical strain, sleeplessness, and the pressure of proving himself all over again. On June 25, 2009, everything stopped. Michael Jackson was found unresponsive at his Los Angeles home and was later pronounced dead at the age of 50. The official cause was acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication, and his death was ruled a homicide. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The news hit the world like a shockwave. Fans gathered in the streets. Radio stations played his music non-stop. Television networks interrupted programming. It felt impossible that the man who had defined generations of pop culture was suddenly gone. Michael Jackson's death remains haunting, because it was not just the loss of a superstar. It exposed the darker side of fame, the exhaustion, the isolation, the medical dependency, and the impossible expectations placed on someone the world treated like an icon instead of a human being. His final chapter was tragic, but his legacy remained. Martin Luther King Jr. died age 39 in 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. was not a celebrity in the ordinary sense. He was something much larger, a moral voice, a national symbol, and one of the most powerful figures in the fight for civil rights. With his calm presence, unforgettable speeches, and commitment to nonviolence, King gave millions of Black Americans hope during one of the most dangerous chapters in American history. His words did not just move crowds. They moved laws, cities, churches, and generations. By the late 1960s, King had already become a global figure. He had led marches, faced jail, endured threats, and watched violence follow him wherever he went. To the public, he appeared steady and fearless, standing before cameras with the weight of a movement on his shoulders. But behind that image was a man living under constant pressure. Every speech could bring another threat. Every campaign could trigger another wave of hate. The applause from supporters was real, but so was the danger waiting in the shadows. On April 4, 1968, King was in Memphis, Tennessee, supporting striking sanitation workers. He was staying at the Lorraine Motel, a place that would soon become frozen in history. That evening, as he stood on the second-floor balcony, a shot rang out. The bullet struck him with devastating force. In an instant, The man whose voice had called for justice, peace, and dignity was silenced. Martin Luther King Jr. was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, but doctors could not save him. He died that evening at the age of 39. His assassination sent shockwaves across America. Cities erupted in grief, anger, and unrest. People who had believed in his dream suddenly had to face the nightmare of his absence. The loss was not only personal, it felt like a wound across the entire nation. What makes King's death so haunting is not only that he was killed, but that he seemed to know the danger surrounding him. In his final speech, he spoke with a strange sense of destiny, as if he understood that time was running out. His life ended on a motel balcony, but his message did not die there. Martin Luther King Jr. remains one of the clearest reminders that a powerful voice can be attacked, but the truth it carries can outlive the bullet. Kobe Bryant, die. Age 41 in 2020. Kobe Bryant was more than a basketball player. He was a symbol of obsession, discipline, and greatness, pushed to its limit. From the moment he entered the NBA as a teenager, Kobe carried himself like someone chasing history. With the Los Angeles Lakers, he became a 5-time NBA champion, an MVP, an Olympic gold medalist, and one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet. To fans, he was not just Kobe Bryant. He was the Black Mamba, fearless, focused, and built for pressure. His career was full of unforgettable moments, impossible shots, championship battles, injuries he played through, and a final 60-point game that felt like a movie ending. But Kobe's influence stretched beyond basketball. He inspired athletes, artists, entrepreneurs, and young dreamers who admired his Mamba mentality. It was more than a slogan. It became a way of life. Work harder, study longer, and never accept average. After retiring, Kobe seemed ready for a second chapter. He became a storyteller, a mentor, a businessman, and most importantly, a devoted father. His bond with his daughter Gianna stood out to fans around the world. She loved basketball too, and Kobe proudly supported her dreams. Together, they represented not just legacy, but continuation, the idea that his fire would live on through her. Then came January 26, 2020. That morning, Kobe, Gianna, and 7 others boarded a helicopter in Southern California. They were heading to a youth basketball event. What should have been a normal trip turned into one of the darkest days in sports history. In foggy conditions near Calabasas, the helicopter crashed into a hillside, killing everyone on board. Kobe Bryant died at the age of 41. Gianna was only 13. The news felt unreal. Fans gathered outside Staples Center. Athletes broke down in interviews. Murals appeared across the world. For many people, it was not just the death of a sports legend. It was the sudden loss of a father, a daughter, and a future that still had so much life ahead. Kobe's death remains heartbreaking. Bob Marley died, age 36, in 1981. Bob Marley was not just a reggae singer. He was a global voice of resistance, peace, struggle, and spiritual power. From the streets of Jamaica to stages across the world, Marley turned reggae into an international language. Songs like No Woman, No Cry, Redemption Song, and One Love did not simply entertain people. They carried messages of survival, unity, and hope for millions who felt unheard. To fans, Bob Marley seemed almost larger than life. His voice was calm but powerful. His image was simple but unforgettable. His music carried warmth, pain, and revolution all at once. He became a symbol of Jamaica, Rastafarian culture, and Black pride. But behind the legend was a man whose body was quietly fighting a disease that would take him far too soon. In 1977, Marley discovered a serious injury on his toe, later diagnosed as acral lentiginous melanoma, a rare form of skin cancer. Doctors advised treatment that could have changed the course of his life, but Marley continued performing, recording, and touring. Whether because of faith, personal belief, or the demands of a rising global career, he kept moving forward while the illness slowly spread. For a while, the public still saw the strong performer. The music continued, the crowds still came. But behind the scenes, the cancer was advancing. It eventually spread to other parts of his body, including his brain, lungs, and liver. The man who had once carried entire audiences with his energy was becoming weaker, even as his songs grew more legendary. On May 11, 1981, Bob Marley died in Miami at the age of 36. His death shocked the world because he was still young, still influential, and still at the height of his cultural power. He had not lived long enough to grow old with his music, but he had already changed the sound of the planet. What makes Marley's death so haunting is the contrast between the peace in his music and the pain of his final years. He sang about freedom, unity, and redemption, yet his own life ended in a hospital far from the stage. Still, cancer did not defeat his message. Bob Marley's body was gone in 1981, but his voice kept traveling through speakers. Whitney Houston, died age 48 in 2012. Whitney Houston had a voice that seemed almost impossible. Clear, powerful, emotional, and effortless, she became one of the greatest singers the world had ever heard. From Greatest Love of All to I Will Always Love You, Whitney did not just sing songs. She lifted them into something unforgettable. Her voice could fill an arena, silence a room, and make millions feel heartbreak all at once. At her peak, Whitney was the picture of success. She had beauty, awards, movie fame, record-breaking albums, and the kind of public admiration most artists spend a lifetime chasing. With The Bodyguard, she became more than a music star. She became a global icon. To fans, she looked like elegance, power, and perfection wrapped into one voice. But behind that perfection was a much more painful reality. Fame followed Whitney everywhere. Every relationship, every mistake, every struggle, and every change in her appearance became a public discussion. The same world that praised her voice also watched her private life with cruel fascination. Over time, her battles with substance use and emotional pressure became impossible to ignore. The tragedy of Whitney Houston is not only that she struggled, but that so much of her struggle happened in front of a public that often judged before it understood. She was expected to remain flawless, while carrying the weight of fame, personal pain, and constant scrutiny. The applause was loud, but so were the rumors. The stage lights were bright, but they could not protect her from the darkness gathering behind them. On February 11, 2012, Whitney Houston was found unresponsive in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. She was pronounced dead at the age of 48. The official cause was accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. Her death stunned the world. Fans mourned not only the loss of a singer, but the loss of a voice that had shaped weddings, heartbreaks, movies, memories, and generations of music. It felt impossible that someone who sounded so powerful could be gone in such a lonely and tragic way. Whitney Houston's story remains heartbreaking because it shows how fame can build a throne and a cage at the same time. Her final chapter was painful, but it should never erase her brilliance. Long after 2012, Whitney's voice still. Tupac Shakur, died age 25 in 1996. Tupac Shakur was not just a rapper. He was a voice of anger, pain, poetry, rebellion, and survival. In the 1990s, he became one of the most powerful figures in hip-hop, not only because of his music, but because of the way he made people feel. Songs like Dear Mama, Changes, and California Love showed different sides of him: the son, the fighter, the thinker, the star, and the young man trapped inside a world full of pressure. To millions of fans, Tupac looked unstoppable. He had charisma, intelligence, talent, and a presence that filled every room he entered. He could speak like an activist, write like a poet, and perform like a man born for the spotlight. But behind that image was a life surrounded by danger. Fame did not calm the storm around him. It made it louder. Legal battles, public feuds, media attention, and the rising tension in hip-hop followed him everywhere. By 1996, Tupac was at the center of one of music's most explosive eras. His album All Eyes on Me had turned him into a bigger force than ever, but the success came with enemies, suspicion, and violence close behind. He was young, famous, and moving through a world where pride, loyalty, and revenge could become deadly in seconds. On September 7, 1996, after attending a Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas, Tupac was riding in a car driven by Suge Knight. At a red light, another vehicle pulled up beside them. Gunfire erupted. Tupac was struck multiple times and rushed to the hospital. For 6 days, fans waited, hoping he would survive. But on September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur died at the age of 25. His death shook hip-hop like an earthquake. It was not just the loss of a rapper, it was the loss of a generation's most complicated voice. Even after his murder, questions remained. Who was truly responsible? Could it have been prevented? And why did so much talent have to be surrounded by so much violence? Tupac's story remains haunting because he seemed to predict his own ending through his music. He rapped about death, betrayal, survival, and legacy with a strange urgency. In life, he was controversial. In death, he became immortal. The bullets ended his body, but they could not silence the voice that still echoes through hip-hop today. Malcolm X died age 39 in 1965. Malcolm X was not a celebrity built by fame. He was a force built by struggle. His voice carried fire, discipline, intelligence, and anger, shaped by the realities of black life in America. While others asked the country to look at injustice with patience, Malcolm demanded that people look at it directly. He spoke about racism, power, pride, self-defense, and dignity in a way that made millions listen and made many others afraid. Born Malcolm Little, he survived hardship, prison, transformation, and reinvention. By the time he became Malcolm X, he was no longer just a man with a message. He was a symbol. His speeches cut through the polite language of politics and exposed the raw wound underneath. To supporters, he was truth without apology. To critics, he was dangerous. But either way, he could not be ignored. By the early 1960s, Malcolm had become one of the most recognizable black leaders in America. His sharp mind, commanding presence, and fearless words made him a national figure. But his rise also created enemies. After breaking with the Nation of Islam, the tension around him grew even heavier. Threats followed him. His home was firebombed. His public appearances carried the feeling that something terrible could happen at any moment. On February 21, 1965, Malcolm X arrived at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City to speak before a crowd. His wife and children were there. Supporters waited for his words. But before he could fully deliver his message, chaos erupted inside the room. Gunmen opened fire, and Malcolm was struck by multiple bullets in front of the audience. He was rushed to the hospital, but there was no saving him. Malcolm X died at the age of 39. His assassination left America stunned and divided. Some mourned him as a hero. Others only understood his importance after he was gone. Over time, questions around the assassination, the people involved, and the deeper forces surrounding his death continued to fuel debate. Even decades later, parts of the story remain painful and contested. Malcolm X's death is haunting because he was killed while still evolving. His views were changing, widening and reaching beyond the boundaries people had placed around him. He did not live long enough to finish that transformation, but his words survived. The stage fell silent in 1965, yet Malcolm's voice still challenges every generation. Marvin Gaye died age 44 in 1984. Marvin Gaye was more than a soul singer. He was one of the voices that helped define the emotional heart of American music. With songs like What's Going On, Let's Get It On, and Sexual Healing, Marvin could move from protest to romance, from pain to desire, from spiritual questioning to deep human vulnerability. His voice sounded smooth, but underneath it was always something wounded, something searching, something painfully real. To the world, Marvin Gaye was a legend. He had the looks, the voice, the fame, and the kind of musical gift that made people stop whatever they were doing just to listen. But behind the hits and the applause, his life was far from peaceful. He struggled with depression, addiction, financial pressure, and a deeply troubled relationship with his father. The same man who gave the world songs about healing was carrying wounds that fame could not repair. By the early 1980s, Marvin's career had found new life with Sexual Healing. But his personal world remained unstable. He moved back into his parents' home in Los Angeles, a place that should have offered safety, but instead became the setting for his final tragedy. Tension inside the house grew heavier. Arguments between Marvin and his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., became more intense, and the family atmosphere was filled with pain that had been building for years. On April 1, 1984, one day before Marvin's 45th birthday, everything came to a horrifying end. After a heated argument, his father shot him. Marvin Gaye, one of the greatest soul voices in history, died at the age of 44. The news shocked the music world. Fans could barely understand how a man who had sung so beautifully about love, peace, and human suffering could die in such a personal and violent way. His death was not a random accident. It was a family tragedy, a final explosion of pain inside a home already filled with emotional damage. What makes Marvin Gaye's death so haunting is the contrast between his music and his ending. He gave the world comfort while struggling to find it for himself. He sang about a broken world, but his own world was breaking too. Marvin's life ended in 1984, but his voice still feels alive, tender, restless, and unforgettable, like a soul still asking what's going on. Jimi Hendrix died age 27 in 1970. Jimi Hendrix was not just a guitarist. He was a revolution in human form. Before him, the electric guitar had power. After him, it had fire, color, danger, and imagination. With songs like Purple Haze, Hey Joe, and All Along the Watchtower, Hendrix changed what rock music could sound like. His playing did not feel ordinary. It screamed, whispered, exploded, and floated all at once. To audiences, Jimi seemed almost supernatural. He could walk onto a stage and make the guitar sound like a machine, a storm, a voice, and a battlefield. His style was wild but controlled, raw but brilliant. He became one of the defining faces of the late 1960s, a black artist standing at the center of a rock world that had not always made space for people like him. He was admired, copied, studied, and mythologized before he even turned 30. But behind the genius was exhaustion. Hendrix lived inside a fast, chaotic world of tours, recording sessions, public expectation, and constant pressure. Fame came with celebration, but also confusion. People wanted more music, more performances, more magic, as if he could keep burning forever without being consumed. Around him were parties, drugs, sleepless nights, and a lifestyle that made rest almost impossible. In September 1970, Jimi was in London, still surrounded by questions about his career, his future, and the people pulling at him from every direction. On September 18, 1970, he was found unresponsive after taking sleeping pills and drinking alcohol. He was rushed to a hospital, but it was too late. Jimi Hendrix died at the age of 27. The official cause involved asphyxia related to vomit after barbiturate intoxication. His death shocked the world because it felt impossible for someone so electric to simply disappear. He had only released a few major studio albums during his lifetime, yet his influence was already massive. In just a few years, he had rewritten the rules of rock music. Jimi Hendrix's final chapter remains haunting because it carries the tragedy of unfinished genius. He was not an old legend fading slowly. He was young, restless, and still evolving. The world never got to hear what he might have created next. His body was gone in 1970, but every screaming guitar solo that followed still carries a piece of his fire. Nat King Cole died, age 45, in 1965. Nat King Cole was not just a singer with a beautiful voice. He was elegance itself, smooth, calm, and unforgettable. His sound carried warmth that could fill a room without ever needing to shout. With songs like Unforgettable, Mona Lisa, and When I Fall in Love, he became one of the most beloved voices of the 20th century. His music crossed race, class, and generation, reaching listeners who may have known nothing about his struggle, but understood the feeling in his voice. Before he became a legendary vocalist, Nat King Cole was already a brilliant jazz pianist. His talent gave him a place in music history, but his presence on television made him even more groundbreaking. In the 1950s, He became one of the first major black entertainers to host a national television show, a historic achievement in an America still divided by racism. To fans, he looked polished, graceful, and untouchable. But behind that calm public image, he carried the pressure of being a black star, breaking barriers in a hostile era. By the mid-1960s, Cole's health began to fail. He had been a heavy smoker for years, and the damage eventually became impossible to ignore. Doctors diagnosed him with lung cancer, a devastating blow for a man whose voice had become his signature gift. Even after surgery and treatment, the illness continued to weaken him. The performer who once sounded effortless was now fighting for every breath. On February 15, 1965, Nat King Cole died at the age of 45 in Santa Monica, California. His death shocked fans around the world. He was still young, still admired, and still connected to a legacy that felt far from finished. The idea that such a smooth, controlled voice could be silenced by disease made the loss even more painful. Nat King Cole's final chapter is haunting because of the contrast between his public grace and private suffering. He faced racism, pressure, illness, and mortality, while maintaining a dignity that became part of his legend. Lung cancer took him in 1965, but it could not take the warmth he left behind. His voice still feels close, like a candle in a dark room, soft, steady, and unforgettable. Aaliyah died, age 22, in 2001. Aaliyah was more than a young R&B star. She was the future, arriving early. With her smooth voice, quiet confidence, and effortless style, she changed the look and sound of late 1990s and early 2000s music. Songs like One in a Million, Try Again, and Rock the Boat made her feel different from everyone else. She did not need to be loud to be powerful. Her mystery, calmness, and cool presence made people lean in closer. By the time she was in her early 20s, Aaliyah had already accomplished what many artists never reach in a lifetime. She had hit records, major music videos, a growing film career, and a fan base that saw her as more than a singer. She was becoming a style icon, an actress, and a symbol of what R&B could become next. Her career was not slowing down, it was expanding. In August 2001, Aaliyah traveled to the Bahamas to film the music video for Rock the Boat. The video captured her beauty, movement, and maturity as an artist, stepping into a new chapter. But after filming wrapped, what should have been a routine flight home turned into one of the most devastating tragedies in music history. On August 25, 2001, Aaliyah and several members of her team boarded a small plane at Marsh Harbor Airport in the Bahamas. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft crashed. Aaliyah died at the age of 22, along with 8 others. Investigations later found that the plane had been overloaded, and the pilot was not properly authorized to fly that aircraft. The news stunned the world. Fans could barely process it. Aaliyah was not an aging star looking back on her legacy. She was young, rising, and still becoming. She had movies ahead, music ahead, and a future that felt almost limitless. Her death remains heartbreaking because it froze her forever at the edge of greatness. We remember what she achieved, but we also mourn what never had the chance to happen. Aaliyah left behind a sound, a style, and a presence that still influence artists today. Her life ended in 2001, but the feeling she created, soft, futuristic, graceful, and unforgettable, never really left. Chadwick Boseman died age 43 in 2020. Chadwick Boseman was not just an actor. He became a symbol of strength, dignity, and quiet greatness. Before the world knew him as T'Challa in Black Panther, Chadwick had already built a powerful career by portraying real black icons with depth and respect. He played Jackie Robinson in 42, James Brown in Get On Up, and Thurgood Marshall in Marshall. Each role carried history, responsibility, and pressure, and Chadwick approached them with the seriousness of someone who understood that storytelling could preserve legacy. But it was Black Panther that turned him into a global cultural figure. When he stepped onto the screen as the King of Wakanda, millions saw more than a superhero. They saw pride, royalty, possibility, and representation on a scale Hollywood had rarely given to black audiences before. Children crossed their arms and shouted, "Wakanda forever," Adults cried in theaters. For many, Chadwick Boseman became the face of a moment that felt bigger than cinema. What the public did not know was that behind the armor, behind the premieres, behind the calm smile, Chadwick was fighting a private battle. In 2016, he had been diagnosed with colon cancer. Yet he continued working through surgeries, treatments, exhaustion, and pain. He filmed major roles while quietly carrying an illness that would have stopped many people completely. To fans, he looked composed. Behind the scenes, he was showing a kind of discipline that few could imagine. On August 28, 2020, Chadwick Boseman died at the age of 43. The announcement shocked the world because most people had no idea he had been sick. Suddenly, interviews, red carpet appearances, and film scenes looked different. People began to understand that the strength they admired on screen had also existed in real life, in silence. His death was heartbreaking because he was still rising. He had already changed Hollywood, but it felt like there was so much more he was meant to do. Chadwick's final chapter reminds us that some people carry pain without making it public, not because it is small, but because their purpose is larger than their suffering. Chadwick Boseman left in 2020, but his presence remains. Every time someone says Wakanda forever, it is no longer just a movie line. It is a tribute to a man who gave the world courage while quietly fighting for his own life. Sam Cooke, died age 33, in 1964. Sam Cooke was not just a soul singer. He was one of the architects of modern popular music. With a voice smooth enough to comfort and powerful enough to inspire, he helped carry gospel feeling into the mainstream and reshape what soul music could become. Songs like You Send Me, Cupid, Bring It On Home to Me, and A Change Is Gonna Come made him more than a hitmaker. They made him a bridge between romance, faith, pain, and social change. At his peak, Sam Cooke had everything the public could see: fame, charm, talent, and influence. He was handsome, polished, and magnetic. But behind the glamour was a man pushing against the limits of a racist music industry. He wanted control over his publishing, his business, and his image. He was not content to simply sing for applause. He wanted ownership, respect, and power in a world that often denied black artists all three. Then came the night that turned his legend into one of music's most debated tragedies. On December 11, 1964, Sam Cooke was shot and killed at the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles. He was only 33 years old. The official ruling described the shooting as justifiable homicide, with motel manager Bertha Franklin saying she acted in self-defense after Cooke entered her office in a state of panic and conflict. But from the beginning, many fans, friends, and observers questioned whether the full story had ever truly been told. That uncertainty is part of what makes Sam Cooke's death so haunting. He was not simply found at the end of a long illness, or lost after a predictable decline. He was gone suddenly, violently, and under circumstances that still feel uncomfortable decades later. The contrast is almost unbearable. A man whose voice sounded like grace died in a place surrounded by confusion, suspicion, and unanswered questions. Sam Cooke's death shocked the music world, but it did not end his influence. If anything, it made his final recordings feel even heavier. A Change Is Gonna Come became an anthem of the civil rights era, a song that seemed to speak beyond his life and into the future. Sam Cooke died young, but his voice never aged. His final chapter remains mysterious, painful, and debated. Yet his legacy stands above the darkness, elegant, revolutionary, and unforgettable. The Notorious B.I.G. died age 24 in 1997. The Notorious B.I.G., born Christopher Wallace, was not just a rapper from Brooklyn. He was a storyteller, with a voice that sounded like it had lived a lifetime before he was even grown. Deep, calm, and commanding, Biggie could turn street survival into cinema. His words painted rooms, corners, fears, dreams, and regrets, with a level of detail that made listeners feel like they were standing beside him. When Ready to Die arrived in 1994, hip-hop changed. Biggie gave the world humor, pain, confidence, danger, and vulnerability, all in one voice. He could be smooth one moment and brutal the next. He could make people laugh, then suddenly remind them how close death felt in the environment he came from. To fans, he was not just talented. He felt inevitable, like a giant who was only beginning to understand his own power. By 1997, Biggie had become one of the biggest. The weight of immense superstardom often conceals a deeply fragile humanity, leaving our brightest cultural lights vulnerable to sudden and unimaginable heartbreak. For so many of these celebrated icons, suffocating industry pressures and the isolation of fame forced them to navigate their deepest vulnerabilities alone, meeting their sudden, tragic ends away from the protective embrace of the audiences who adored them. Yet, no horrific departure or heartbreaking final headline can ever diminish the monumental impact of their lives. While their physical journeys were cut far too short under devastating circumstances, their electrifying talent, soulful artistry, and historic contributions to Black culture remain powerful, timeless, and completely untouchable by any tragedy. Which of these heartbreaking celebrity losses shocked you the deepest, and whose incredible legacy do you honor the most today? Share your thoughts in the comments below, hit that like button, subscribe to Black Hollywood Uncut, and ring the notification bell for more unvarnished true stories.